Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. The world is on the edge, quite literally. Now, Israel says that it will be extracting a price from Iran when the time is right. America has also increased its deployment and moved the troops now towards the Middle East. Iran's attack on Israel has destabilized the entire nation. Now, there is a significant moment because Iran, which remember has through time since its establishment as the Islamic Republic of Iran in the year 1979, never got into a direct escalation with Israel. But this time, it has. And to think that Netanyahu will cave in despite the US being very, very proactive might just be a bit naive. Because do remember, he's also under a lot of pressure right now. There is political pressure. There is clearly a lot of domestic pressure. So we believe here, and the nation wants to know whether this could be leading to a significant response in some time coming in from Israel. Now remember, the larger concern is whether this moment, ladies and gentlemen, will trigger a World War III. And if you look at the history, World War I, World War II, all began as regional conflagrations between nations. So at this point, we really cannot rule out an escalation. We have to watch very closely. And I say this because both sides here, remember, are heavily militarized. And they are very, very determined nations. And that is why it's extremely important for everyone to be very constant, to be looking at what will happen as far as the story goes. And we ask here whether this will be leading us to the brink of World War III. Let's quickly also bring up these images. These images again will, again and again be repeated. These are defining, terrifying images that tell you that nothing is normal right now as far as these nations are concerned, and more regions, their allies, getting into this. The world at war, and clearly at a point where you will have to have individuals also taking sides. This also includes India. India, for the moment, has said that we want a resolution, a peaceful resolution to what's going on. We also do say that we stand with Israel at this moment. A lot of these images, again and again, that we have seen on our screens are a grim reminder of the things to come. Without wasting time, I want to introduce our panel of guests joining us right now. We have Dr. Swasti Rao, who's the Associate Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute, joining us. Ray Locker, who's a journalist and an author. We also have Colonel Retired Dr. Rafael George Bonig. He's a senior researcher at the Big Insan Institute for Strategic Studies at the Barlan University. Dr. Muzaffar Senal, visiting scholar, Birmingham University. He's also joining us on the show. Dr. Swasti, let's begin by asking you, are we really on the brink of World War III? Are there really reasons for all of us to worry?
To you, Deepti, and yes, I think when the Hamas had attacked Israel on October 7, I think everybody was worried about the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario was a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran. And when what Israel has been doing by going after the three proxies that Iran has been using, deploying in its war against the Israeli cause, through Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and the way the Israelis have retaliated, and then what Iran has done yesterday, and now what Israel has vowed to do today, I think the situation is very serious. We are already in the middle of escalation. I still do not see that there will be an all-out war, depending upon how you want to define that. I'm not really of that opinion. Why? Because, of course, there's a huge American presence in the region. I mean, in the entire Eastern Mediterranean, the Americans are there. In the Red Sea, they have guided missile destroyers. In the Gulf of Oman, they have aircraft carriers. They have the aircraft carrier, and then they have military bases. They have more than 40,000 American troops that are stationed, in different bases. Not just that, they've also said that they are going to send a few more thousand of troops. So that's one part that Iran very well knows what an escalation would mean. That's the first thing. The other thing is that what we have to look out for is that now that Israel retaliates, we saw that when Iran retaliated, it did nothing. I think they kind of fired about 200 or whatever number of ballistic missiles and everything. Most of them which were targeted on any strategic targets were taken down. The ones that were not taken down actually fell down on very unpopulated areas. And ultimately, only one Palestinian man died in Gaza. And I think 2 Israelis were hurt, wounded because of shrapnels or those kind of debris injuries. So nothing of any significant really happened. But it has now given Israel a reason to retaliate. And the way Israel has been retaliating in a very no-holds-barred approach, Deepti, my assessment would be that we have to see whether Israel is going after the oil facilities in Iran, and of course in the oil facilities. We know that whenever Iran, if you look back at the Iraq-Iran war and how the Iranian economy suffered because of that, those attacks. So I would be interested in seeing whether Israel is going after these three important oil facilities, in Iran, and two, whether Israel is serious about going after the nuclear facilities. And I think that in many ways would also determine to what level does this get escalated. But my understanding is that by and large, everybody understands, no matter how much they pretend by whatever statements they give, what an all-out war would mean. It is in nobody's interest. But yes, weakening of this entire thing is, I think, today in America's interest, and that is why we see this tacit support. My last point about India. India, of course, from Indian perspective, we have taken a very cautious approach. We have certain genuine interest with Iran and genuine interest with Israel, and we've always tried to be multi-aligned and multi-vector, in this part of the world. But there's very little India can really do there. And that limited role actually became evident as Indian maritime commerce had to reroute all the way through the Cape of Good Hope after the Red Sea became completely non-negotiable and, non-viable for us. So I think India has a limited role. That's why India is cautious. But at the same time, I think it's very clear that India understands what Israel is going through. And you see it coming out from the Indian leaders again and again, including the army chief, by the way. Back to you, Deepti.
Okay, Swasti, you touch a lot of important points. The US intervention is also pretty interesting, but one would say that to think, Ray, that just because the US is intervening here, the US is clearly looking at elections. You had Trump, obviously using this entire opportunity to hit back at Biden, to hit back at Kamala Ray Locker, because he believes that this is his best opportunity, his best trump card, so-called, to hit back at what he's saying is a weak government. But in the light of, a lot of these geopolitical developments and the fact that this is no longer a war of proxies, but Iran for the very first time has entered into this war, Ray Locker, what is your assessment of the situation?
Well, I don't think the United States wants to get involved in this at all. Obviously, we're going to support Israel because we've been doing that since the country's inception in 1948, and nothing's going to change. And we've been in places like this before, not quite to the extent where we have the Iranian involvement we have now. But, we had a crisis there in 1970 with the Black September movement. That was something that concerned a lot of U.S. policymakers. The Yom Kippur War in 1973, that also had people thinking that the United States might be involved. And if you remember then, the United States went to a higher level nuclear alert than it ever had before during that situation. So we've been there before. I don't think that we're going to go any farther than this. And in terms of the politics of this thing, if somehow the United States got drawn into doing something to Iran, I don't think that would hurt anybody. And doing things to Iran is always popular in the United States during a political season. That's kind of the knee-jerk instinct, whether it's the right thing to do or not. I mean, Iran has always been one of the bogeymen of U.S. politics since 1979 when the students took over the U.S. Embassy. So no, there's not a lot of clientele in the United States that likes Iran. So short term, some kind of U.S. strike on Iran would be popular. Long term, it would be a disaster.
And Colonel Dr. Raffel George, why don't you push that point a little further? If you look at the social media, you look at the chatter anywhere today, people are only asking, is this just the beginning of World War III? And, something that will be completely out of hand in case that happens, because you're looking at both sides very, very determined. You're looking at both sides heavily militarized, and the stakes are pretty high. In your assessment, what possibly could the next few days entail, and what should all of us as humanity be concerned about?
Well, no doubt that the Iran ballistic missiles attack of yesterday provides a solid casus belli for Israel. This is something which is an official declaration of war. Therefore, the question of retaliation is not a question of if, but when. And apparently, Israel is about to retaliate within 2 or 3 days, according to my understanding. So this is something that could provide a kind of deterioration or escalation. and we can see a kind of, I would say, back and forwards dual ballistic missiles attack and Israeli air attacks, because the Iranian Air Force is not able to reach the territory of Israel. It is equipped with old aircrafts, mainly US F-4 and additional old aircrafts. So apparently Israel has the capabilities to retaliate, and mainly has a kind of short list of strategic assets which could be, I would say, a target for Israeli Air Force or Israeli missiles. And I refer to two categories. One is the energy industry, and the second is the nuclear-related facilities, which are, as a matter of fact, the main goal of Israel in order to avoid the Iranians to reach to a military nuke capability. At the moment, we are talking about a kind of, I would say, more symbolic than a full war between Israel and Iran. However, as I mentioned before, an escalation is an option, and a lot depends on the willingness of Iran to enlarge the scope of the military activity in the Middle East. It's important to recall that Israel is still facing two additional fronts. One in Lebanon, which is lately gaining some force because Israel penetrated the Lebanese territory with ground forces. However, the scope of this activity is limited and very precisely targeted. But on the other side, we still have activities in the Gaza Strip, where although Hamas is almost eliminated, we still face some militia activities against our forces. So therefore, the additional mission for Israel are not only Iran, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Just to add one point, it's the proxy located in Yemen, the Houthis. This week, Israel launched a very massive air attack against Houthis' assets, mainly in Hodeidah port. And I believe that the damage caused by these attacks is huge, so that the Houthis will have to rethink if they will decide to relaunch rockets towards Israel. So I believe that at this very moment, Israel is gaining a kind of momentum, and the Iranians will be witnessing what it's all about. Besides, I think the Iranians may consider their attack as of yesterday as a failure, since the Israeli multi-layer defense systems was very effective, and over 90, maybe 95% of the incoming missiles were intercepted and destroyed. No matter few of them fall in places, unpopulated places, without causing any casualties. So I believe the Iranians will have to rethink if they will initiate another such large-scale attack.
Okay, I think Dr. George has touched a lot of other interesting points, Dr. Muzaffar, that perhaps you can talk about. no longer the war of the proxies. Why did Iran enter this war at this point? This is already now a seven-front war we are dealing with, clearly not symbolic. This is real war. So the tension is quite real. It is quite palpable. And that is why you've seen a lot of world capitals right now weighing in on where they should stand. In your assessment, why did Iran do what it did? And what pushed Iran to jump into this war no longer as a proxy?
Yeah, actually, what we are watching is...
I
Yes.
believe...
that is for Dr. Muzaffar.
Yeah. I believe there is a very dynamic struggle of power in Iran, mainly between the moderates led by the new elected president and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, who are supported basically by the supreme leader.
Okay.
Actually, if it was depending on the new president, this attack wouldn't happen, because the IRGC pressed the supreme leader to retaliate after they lost several officers in Lebanon.
Dr. George, if you allow me a moment, I want to also get Dr. Muzaffar into this conversation. Dr. Muzaffar, please complete your point.
Yeah,
please.
thank you. What
Yes.
we are watching now, this is the Iranian retaliation that, especially after the killing of the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July by Israeli intelligence service Mossad. Iran immediately announced that it is the violation of the sovereignty and it will lose the right of the retaliation under the UN Charter 51, the self-defense take place, but it did not happen. Since what we learned yesterday or the day before yesterday, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian stated that, I think in the CNN interview, he stated that the assurance given by the Americans and the European leaders establish a ceasefire in return to Iran's non-response to the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in its territory. But it did not happen. Therefore, now Iran has no other option, most probably, that they see this is their choice. The Iranian, let's say, political leaders choose to respond. That will a matter of the escalation. But now we will see that how the diplomatic efforts will take place. The most important thing is about that. I agree with the diplomatic efforts that many previously the speakers has already also announced that there is always a room for diplomacy. And especially in here for the questions of the third war and so on and so forth, which is relating with mostly about these rumors or news circled around to the Ukrainian-Russian war. But now it's turned into a kind of the Middle Eastern, let's say, clashes.
Okay.
But especially Russian and the Chinese response will be the more important and how it's going to be escalate or not, which is not only about the US responses, but also the Russians and the Chinese, let's say, policies will be also effective. I'm sure that Iran will decide that it is, let's say, strategic balances, then retaliate. But I do not expect the escalation of the war into the third war, but let's say the limited regional war will take place, most probably. But what I expect hopefully will not be the escalate more, but especially as soon as possible ceasefire and the return for the diplomatic table is more important for us now for the sake of the humanity.
Okay, and because I just have limited time, but Dr. Swasthi, I have to ask you this question that a lot of our viewers have been asking. You know, you have the US, you have Europe. On the other side, you have powers like Russia and China.
Yeah.
Then you also have India. India, for the moment, has said that dialogue should be the way forward. Aggression does not serve anyone's purpose, but we also stand with Israel.
Yeah.
So in a world and a time that is highly polarized, you believe sooner or later you will have important world capitals taking a stand?
So very quickly, with respect to the role of India, I think we've already discussed that India has a genuine interest with Iran in the form of Chabahar and INSTC and the oil that we were thinking of buying again. And then we also have, genuine interest with Israel in the form of I2U2, the strategic quadrilateral that you saw forming in the region. And then from there, what derived as what was known as IMEC, okay, and the connectivity and all of that. So because we don't have so much time, I want to just talk about that India's multi-alignment and cautious approach is very well known and understood, and I think also appreciated. Coming to Russia and China, I would like to point out that today Iran, by doing what it has done, somewhere and at a very wrong timing, because Russia remains very, very invested in a war in Ukraine, which is actually getting prolonged. It has already become a war of protracted, conflict of sorts, and it's not really ending anytime soon. So Russia is not really in a position to really help Iran militarily. Okay, let's not forget that the Russian export base, the military export base, has fallen after the war in Ukraine. So earlier they were exporting to 31 countries. Now they're exporting to only about 11, 12 countries. So even if they were to export, it would not be anything significant. That's the first thing to Iran. About China, I've already seen statements from the Chinese which have said that they are supporting Iran. But please remember that China is extremely risk averse in this environment, because China has very deep economic interest with so many powers in the region. Okay. Yes. And again, China is under a lot of scrutiny from the combined West when it comes to secondary, all the dual use support to Russia. So what I'm saying is that, all these, China is basically doing lip service. Russia's, of course, prime minister was in Iran, and they talked about their comprehensive, so to say, agreement, and they talked about a lot of points. But I would really be interested in seeing how are they going to implement it in the current geopolitical realities. Okay. And finally, like I said, that from the US perspective, I completely agree with the fact that it is not in the US perspective to actually escalate it in any way. But at the same time, keeping in mind the fact that whatever is happening today, you also see that there's been a kind of a linking of these different security theaters about what is happening in one is having some sort of spillover in the other security theater. I think in a limited sense, it would be in everybody's, and especially the US interest, to sort of weaken this alliance between Russia, China, North Korea and all of that by supporting Israel in a tacit enough manner. But India would want to be as cautious as possible and would want to see this conflict end sooner than later.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Only for want of time, but I think there are different layers to that story. Gentlemen, and Dr. Swasti, thank you so much for your perspective here on Times Now. Remember, we'll continue to get you the biggest newsmakers, voices from across the globe that tell you more about this entire issue. And the critical question that we began the show with is, right now, the world looking at World War III? We really hope and pray that's not the situation. But thank you so much for your time and perspective. We quickly head into a break. On the other side, coming back with more.